This lecture will talk about the policies and practices governing informed consent, which is one of the key elements required to ensure that research involving human participants are conducted in accordance with internationally acceptable frameworks. In general, the regulatory requirements for informed consent have been structured and standardized in biomedical research in view of the strict regulations that govern biomedical interventional studies, such as in the case of clinical trials. However, other types of research, such as social research involving human participation, also require evidence of the voluntary, free, and informed consent of those who contribute their time, insights, effort, and data for use of researchers, though the actual form may differ. So, in this lecture, I will endeavor to define and describe general informed consent considerations in different contexts and reaffirm that informed consent remains a critical element in the ethical conduct of research involving human participants. Informed consent comes from the universal ethical principle of respect for persons, which incorporates one, respect for autonomy or the individual's right to make his or her own informed decision free from coercion or undue influence, and two, protection of persons with diminished autonomy where individuals may have limited capacity to make independent decisions or act in their own best interest due to factors like age, disability, illness, or circumstances that restrict their freedom. There are several elements that fulfill a valid informed consent process. The first one is competence or the ability of prospective or actual participants or subjects to understand relevant information presented to them. For example, the purpose of the study, foreseeable risks, and potential benefits, and to appreciate the potential consequences of any decisions they make based upon this information. This element honors the universal ethical principle of respect for persons, which guarantees the freedom to decide about one's own life. Now, there are various obstacles to competence, the most commonly cited of which is age. Hence, we consider minors as not having the competence to engage in an informed consent process. The next element is disclosure, which requires a mandatory set of information that must be communicated to the subject in order to ensure that the subject's decision is informed. Now, we will go back to this mandated list in a later slide. Then the next element is comprehension, which in general means understanding. But in the research context, this understanding is much more structured and specific tools are required. And one common tool is the translation of the informed consent form in the local vernacular of the subject to ensure cultural as well as content appreciation by the subject. The next element is voluntariness, which is what we refer to in a situation where there is absence of coercion or undue influence, that the subject has truly agreed, not for compensation or any other influence, but for a lack of a better word, altruism, or the desire to contribute to attaining the social value of the study. And finally, the actual consent or agreement to participate by the subject in the study, which can take many forms, as we shall see in the next few slides. Informed consent documents, as we know them, took on traditional forms. That is, they are traditionally text based. In some clinical trials, the informed consent form can consist of 20 or more pages, formatted like a long contract, sometimes rendering comprehension conservatively uncertain. Overall, it negatively affects readability and reduce comprehension or understanding of the key elements of consent. This is the central criticism of text based consent documents due to the potential to diminish its ability to convey information and the tendency for participants to either not read them at all or fully understand them. ICH-GCP E6R3 endeavored to address this weakness. But before we look at the ICH-GCP solutions, I would like to discuss first the different types of informed consent forms currently available, which I am grouping as follows. The first is standard written consent, verbal consent, implied consent, and specific waivers such as waiving the informed consent signature or documentation of consent or waiving the consent process and form altogether. The second set refer to common consent forms for different populations and special purposes. And third would be the emerging use of electronic and multimedia consent, especially in view of the ICH GCPE 6R3 updates. Standard written consent is used when the subject population involves a competent adult who is typically literate, not vulnerable, and able and comfortable to sign the informed consent form. In this case, the administration of consent uses a written, text based medium. The standard written consent has the following standard content. First are the details about the project, such as the title and research site where the study will be done. Next is information about the study, including a laymanized explanation of the objectives of the study. I emphasize laymanized here because copying the objective from the protocol may just alienate participant appreciation of the research. The expected commitments from participants and what they are expected to get from the study. Next are the risks and benefits, which should also be laymanized because what the subjects need to understand is what will happen to them if they join. Next is privacy and confidentiality. Any future use of their information or biospecimen, compensation, if any, researcher information, and finally, research ethics committee information. So, written consent is the most common form of consent. Sometimes consent is verbal depending on the protocol. In verbal consent or even assent, all elements required from the written form are technically demandable, but the documentation is considered waived. Researchers can verbally explain consent details to a participant using what we call a verbal script. The verbal or oral script is reviewed and approved in place of the written form to convey key information to the subjects that are important to their decision to participate in the study. Verbal consent is acceptable in research settings where traditional written consent is not feasible, such as for participants with low literacy, for research in culturally sensitive context, or when there are risks of a paper trail. The process should be documented with a signed verification form from a witness, and the Research Ethics Committee should approve the use of this consent method among the study protocol documents. Implied consent means that the consent is not explicitly articulated, but instead inferred from the action or cooperation of the subject or the participant. This is generally approvable for low-risk research. Implied consent, however, requires explicit Research Ethics Committee approval for what is called the waiver of signature or informed consent documentation. According to the national guidelines, the signature waiver is typically acceptable for studies using a low-risk questionnaire provided adequate information has been given to the respondent. An example would be a satisfaction questionnaire that a patient just picks up in the clinic. If the patient completes the questionnaire, we can consider that an indication of implied consent. On the other hand, waiver of informed consent means that the whole process is waived in its entirety, including the use of the informed consent form. The guidelines allow this provided specific conditions are met and that the Research Ethics Committee approval was obtained. Conditions include restriction to archival research, research using naturalistic observation with assurance of low risk and anonymity, or a justification that research cannot be practicably carried out without the waiver. Such waiver requires applicable debriefing. An example is retrospective medical records review, provided that anonymity is maintained and that information sought is considered non-sensitive. Some studies will recruit from different participant populations, for example, minors who consented or assented via parental permission, and adults who may or may not be able to consent for themselves, or will involve multiple cohorts, such as in clinical research, which can include informed consent forms for pregnant partners, biobanking, and the like. Assent is the agreement to participate in research given by a minor or a participant with no capacity to consent. Taking part in the assent process can help participants who cannot consent to feel more in control and engaged in the research process. When someone under the legal age to consent will be recruited, it is common to seek consent from a legally acceptable representative or LAR such as a parent or guardian before the child assents using a method that is age appropriate. The appointment of the LAR follows the rule on succession. For example, we can start with the parent, grandparents, older sibling, 21 years and older, or the actual custodian, which may require extra documentation. One example from the national guidelines is the guideline on older persons, which recognizes the vulnerability that can be inherent in the elderly. The guidelines differentiate this vulnerability across three brackets of older persons, namely the young old, which refers to older persons aged 60 to 69, the middle old, or those 70 to 79 years old, and the oldest old, or those 80 and above. When older persons are involved in health research, the researcher must assess for cognitive, psychiatric, or other functional issues that may affect consent. Also, sometimes the researcher must also anticipate the need for designing multiple consent forms in case there's a need to secure consent from a legally authorized representative. In this case, the subject may not be able to consent on his or her own, or if a caregiver needs to be involved in the research procedure, such as in an interview. If an LAR will sign the consent form, there must be an assent process for the subject. The national guidelines recommend the use of some standard assessment tools for competence, such as the mini mental state exam. However, this is not mandatory. What is important is the ability of the researcher to make an assessment of whether or not the older person can be engaged in an informed consent process. Motor skills are not even an issue, as he or she can use a thumb mark instead of a signature. Another example is the LAR consent and assent in studies involving minors. The national guidelines give us brackets for assent for guidance of researchers, such as at what age and what kind of assent is to be administered. In this scale, assent is not required for children under 7 years old. This was recommended through a consensus statement from a roundtable consultation among child development experts in the Philippines. But as they grow older, you can see that the guidelines recognize the ability of children to understand and decide on research-related participation, provided the information is conveyed in an age-appropriate medium. Thus, verbal assent is required for children who are 7 to under 12 years old with the use of an ethics committee approved assent script. Then progressively, the youngest age at which a written assent is required is 12 years old in the 12 to under 15 age bracket. This written assent must be approved by the ethics committee, which should ensure that it is simple enough for the child to appreciate or understand. Children 15 to under 18 years old are considered ethically competent to understand research participation, but are not yet legally competent to enter into agreements on their own. So the national guidelines recommend that children in this bracket indicate their assent in the same informed consent signed by the LAR. With regards to the LAR, both parents can sign the form, but the guidelines technically requires only the signature of one parent. In the new ICH GCPE 6R3, the provision on assent is elaborated and specified such that where a minor is to be included as a participant, age-appropriate assent information should be provided and discussed with the minor as part of the consent process. And assent from the minor to enroll in the trial should be obtained as appropriate. A process for consent or reconsent should be considered if during the course of the trial the minor reaches the age of legal consent in accordance with applicable laws. If you remember, a similar provision had already been required by the SIOM's guidelines way back in 2016.
The study was conducted to describe the development of a comic book to facilitate children's understanding of informed assent using clear and simple language. Five researchers developed a comic book assent that presents a short story containing information about a hypothetical study. The drawings were presented in the form of comics representing the main stages, instruments, and procedures of this hypothetical project. The procedures were presented in the form of illustrations showing each task being performed by a child, including a drawing of a child sitting on a wheelchair. The hypothetical project aimed to test the use of virtual reality games for motor learning and rehabilitation. Drawings included the invitation to participate, objectives, methods, instruments, procedures, risks, benefits, and the researcher's contact information. The first drawing invites children to participate. The second talks about the details about the instruments used as well as some images of the games. The third one explains what may happen in the research. And the fourth drawing shows the last page of the form, which presents the researcher's contact information and directions for necessary signatures. The texts are short, but they present the nature of the research as well as its objectives, methods, or procedures, expected benefits, and options for receiving assistance to address the possible risks or inconveniences that the participants may experience. A sample of 20 children between the ages of 7 and 12 years who were part of an actual bigger study were recruited to respond to this type of Likert scale based questionnaire to focus on the understanding of verbal and visual information. Children gave scores of 0, 1, and 2 on the Likert scale about did you understand what was written in the form. And they gave scores of 0 and 1 on the second Likert scale asking about did you understand the figures. Most of the participants answered that they perceived the content of the text to be excellent and very good, and the illustrations were perceived as excellent and very good as well. Authors of this study believe that considering the need for children to understand the procedures that involve their participation in research, and especially considering their rights assent in comic book form, is an excellent tool that can be easily used and reproduced around the world.
Broad consent is consent for a range of future research on stored human information or biospecimen. It can be unconditional consent from a donor that his or her information or specimen can be reused indefinitely for any type of research. Or it can be conditional consent, which means that the subject can stipulate what types of research can use the data or specimen and for how long. Now, this shows an example of a broad consent form for future use provided by the World Health Organization. You can see here that the form includes different options for consideration of the patient or the subject or participant of research.
Finally, we have the pregnant partner consent, which refers to consent given by a pregnant individual for personal and pregnancy information to be included in research either directly or for a study partner. When a participant's partner becomes pregnant during the study, it is usually necessary to allow researchers collect medical information about the pregnancy and the child to study the potential impact of the research on pregnancy itself. In research, this consent specifically covers the collection of information about their health, the pregnancy, and the baby, which can be withdrawn at any given time. One thing to watch out for is that it is quite common to see a waiver in pregnant partner informed consent forms that says that the trial is not involved in pregnancy management and that the pregnant individual must seek personal medical advice from her doctor. Ethics committee review must ensure, therefore, that consent will address potential risks to both the mother and the fetus, respecting the mother's autonomy in decision making. The new Good Clinical Practice or GCP guidelines for clinical trials resolved some of the weaknesses associated with a text only consent by introducing the multimedia consent. GCP now recognizes that varied approaches to the provision of information and discussion can be used, including providing text in different formats, images and videos, and using telephone or video conferencing with the investigator or site staff, which means that it is now acceptable that informed consent can be documented, that is signed and dated, either on paper or electronically, and that obtaining consent remotely may now be considered when appropriate. In a way, this unburdens us of some of the restrictions posed by traditional paper based only consent. Now, while this is admittedly groundbreaking, what GCP actually accomplished is to institutionalize a change that people have been asking for a very long time. Innovative use of technology can create a shift in facilitating consent engagement. Sometimes extreme necessity creates a greater need to adapt or adjust. The COVID 19 pandemic, for example, effected a profound change in the informed consent practice as a result of the shifting of research procedures to online procedures. Recruitment and information dissemination in the face of mandatory isolation and mobility restrictions required parallel procedures that can be conducted remotely or electronically. The use of electronic consent or e-consent, for example, which was a technology available since the early 90s, intensified during COVID as necessity provided the opportunity for electronic consent to become more common. There are several examples of e-consent, and one such example is the e-consent framework offered by RedCap. As early as 1998, studies have been done to assess the utility of using multimedia consent in research. One particular study probed subjects on how a multimedia tool could be worked into the informed consent process. The authors first performed a needs assessment using focus groups and interviews with healthcare researchers, institutional review board members, and three groups of patients who had depression, breast cancer, or schizophrenia. Their feedback was incorporated into the design of a prototype multimedia tool. The design included general modules with information about clinical trials and informed consent as well as trial specific modules. The authors then used the resulting prototype multimedia tool for informed consent in follow up focus groups and interviews to obtain feedback on the feasibility and potential effectiveness of using such a tool routinely for clinical trials. The consensus or conclusion among participants was that such material makes for good preparation for a conversation with the research team. Calls for innovation have been appearing in regulatory documents in recent years. For example, in March 2024, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration circulated a draft guidance for institutional review boards, investigators, and sponsors that will harmonize certain regulations on human participant protections specific to the mandatory key information presented to human participants in the beginning of the informed consent document. The proposed guidance elaborates and clarifies the presentation of this key information and includes recommendations for the content, organization, and presentation of informed consent information in FDA regulated clinical investigations of drugs, devices, and biologics, and in non exempt human research. The guidance recommends including flexible strategies for providing key information to prospective research subjects that take into consideration current practice and available technologies, depending on the study design, of course, and the prospective subject population or other relevant factors. For example, we are encouraged to develop innovative ways and utilize available technologies to provide key information that will help prospective subjects to better understand the reasons why one might or might not want to participate in the research, and presented using alternative media such as illustrations, video, and electronic tablets to meet the goals of improving clarity and increasing prospective subjects' understanding of consent information, or to consider developing alternative ways to present key information that would facilitate understanding by the prospective subjects, for example, by consulting in advance with patient advocacy groups or prospective subjects themselves about their views on what such key information may entail. The US FDA draft guidance proposed other strategies to promote or improve communication and understanding of the informed consent document. These other strategies include reformatting the text based consent form, reorganizing the content of the consent itself for readability, and maximizing visual cues. To facilitate understanding of key information in a simple, concise format, the guidance also recommends that we consider organizing information using defined information units referred to as information bubbles, which means that they can be read in clusters of information as well as together without necessarily sacrificing meaning. And this makes content easy to read and understand. Each information bubble can address separate topics, such as one bubble for the purpose of the study, another bubble for potential risks or alternative therapies. This recommendation cites research findings that people had better comprehension when information was provided in a simple format and organized in information units. The bubble format can come in many forms like boxing information units together or using bullet points to simplify long explanations and ensuring ample white space around the text. Such formatting approaches may make documents easier to read, be organized, and presented in a way that does not merely provide lists of isolated facts but rather facilitates prospective subjects or legally acceptable representatives' understanding of the reasons why one might or might not want to participate. The guidance shows an example on how recommendations can be implemented using this hypothetical clinical trial. As you can see, this is the beginning of the key information for subjects document where information units are grouped into bubbles, which really does improve readability, especially noting the generous white space around the text. And further into the document, we see use of columns to show parallel comparison between risks and benefits. In a way, this strategy uses both textual or verbal cues together with nonverbal cues to drive home the point or communicate the intention to compare risks with benefits. The new ICH-GCP E6R3 introduces a fit-for-purpose approach to quality by design and increases the focus on study participants' perspectives in trial design and conduct. There is a reference to public involvement and trial diversity, including the requirement for sponsors to clearly describe the rationale for inclusion or exclusion of participants to improve clinical trial generalizability. The most important changes in the guidance on obtaining informed consent prescribed by ICH-GCP E6R3 will be presented in this lecture, including the use of technologies to inform participants and obtain consent. The new informed consent guidance from E6R3 is underscored by the focus on participant perspective. Across the board in this document, all references to the word subject were replaced by the word participant. The use of participants instead of subjects is meant to highlight the increased focus on study participants considering their active contribution in clinical trial conduct and design. The ICH-GCPE6R3 updates include multimedia consent by promoting diverse formats like text, images, and videos to improve participant comprehension and engagement, especially for decentralized trials where remote consent is common. The lesson here is that the characteristics of the potential trial population, for example, participants who may lack familiarity with computerized system, as well as the suitability of the method of obtaining consent, should be taken into consideration when developing the consent materials and processes. When computerized systems are used to obtain informed consent, clinical trial participants may be given the option to use a paper-based approach as an alternative. The new provisions specify that obtaining consent remotely may always be considered when appropriate. There are several examples of multimedia consent materials. One common example is the use of animated videos because The visual nature of short animated videos can explain complex procedures or even medical concepts better because they stimulate multiple senses, for example, using the sight and hearing at the same time. If video is not available, audio descriptions can be used to provide supplementary information to participants who may have difficulty reading or understanding text. Some clinical trials actually add interactive quizzes to help participants test their understanding of the information and reinforce key points about the study. Finally, glossaries can provide definitions of technical terms used in the consent materials. The earliest forms of e consent or digital consent actually used an electronic glossary that can be accessed by clicking on a word. Designing specifications for a multimedia supplementary tool to enhance the informed consent process for clinical trials to effectively use multimedia for informed consent should ensure that the material is clear, concise, and easy to understand. Visuals like graphics, images, can be useful in illustrating key points and make the information more accessible compared to text-based consent alone. Illustrations or drawings are capable of summarizing or highlighting key points to make the most important information easily understood or appreciated by a potential research participant. The example we see here on this slide was created by graduate students as part of a 20-minute class work in research ethics. As you can see, the highlighted points include the interventions such as the blood draw, the medicine, or drugs that need to be taken. ICH-GCP E6R3 also updated the informed consent checklist by focusing on key principles of ethical conduct, voluntariness, clear and concise participant information about risks and benefits, privacy, data protection, and the active role of the Research Ethics Committee and the investigator in the protection of participants' safety. The checklist is premised on the obligation of the investigator to provide and explain a mandated set of information and materials to the participants. Substantially, the information remained or stayed the same, but now with more language clarity. For example, in the first five items highlighted here in yellow, the changes were clarification specifying a summary of the experimental aspects of the trial, directly referring to an investigational product or products, and explicitly providing a statement on what is actually expected of participants, which were not specifically articulated in previous versions of ICH-GCP. Remember, we said earlier that the word subject will now be replaced by the word participants. This correction was done all throughout the document, also highlighted here in yellow in this list. The item on follow-up procedures for participants who stop taking the investigational product is a new provision highlighted here in blue, emphasizing the right of participants to continuing care. Also highlighted in blue on this slide is another new provision which pertains to the handling of participants' data even in the event of withdrawal or discontinuation of participation. On the other hand, access to participant information, highlighted here in yellow, relanguaged the formerly prescriptive statement that monitors, auditors, the ethics committee, and regulatory authorities will be granted direct access to the subject's original medical records, which seemingly says that the person has no choice and instead explains that it is the consent or agreement to participate that facilitates such access to personal information. The regulatory requirement that the trial may be registered on publicly accessible and recognized databases is now specifically explained. Finally, the changes in the rest of the checklist items show the word participant replacing the word subject, but otherwise remained essentially the same. I will conclude my presentation by revisiting the World Health Organization standard set of informed consent templates, which was a part of published resources on research ethics over 20 years ago, attributed to the WHO Research Ethics Committee. These templates taught most of us then of the WHO recommendation that language used in informed consent forms be at the level of a local grade 6 student. And we need to remember that while these templates, though really useful and most likely very much regulatory compliant, they remain text based and thus vulnerable to the inherent weaknesses of a solely text based consent. Here are the references used in this lecture if you wish to do further reading. They are all included in our compilation of references.
This ends my presentation. Should you have any questions even after this lecture, feel free to contact me through the email listed on this slide. Thank you very much for your attention.